Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I apologize that we're a little bit late getting started. Technology is always your best friend until it needs to work. My name is Matt Gerbich. I'm here with the Texas Trees Foundation. I just want to go over a few quick webinar notes. If you are a speaker, if you can mute your phone until it is your turn to mute. We will be recording this webinar for future use. There is a poll that you can access as an attendee that asks if you would be interested in receiving tree in the fall to help recover from the tornado. Please click on that and take a part in that poll. We can gather information as we go. And so with that, we're going to get started. This is a webinar to talk about tree recovery and assessment after the tornado. And before I get started, I just want to give a very big thank you to the city of Dallas, and especially Councilmember Gates, Navarez, Kleinman, and Magoo, and their offices for helping us to get the word out about this webinar, helping us through this process, and I know that they will be continuing to help us as we move through the
No, I don't have the other thing, I just have this.
Process. If you are not speaking, please mute your line for me. Thank you. So before we get started, I would like to give Councilmember Gates a chance to say a few words, and she had agreed, and the council members all agreed to let her speak on their behalf so that we can make sure we're being respectful of everybody's time that's on this call and has chosen to join us tonight. So, Councilwoman Gates.
All right, thank you, Matt. And I just want to thank you for putting this together in this partnership with the city of Dallas. I know these are challenging times. We, survived the tornado, and we thought that was going to be our biggest hurdle to get through 2020. Little did we know we would now be suffering through a pandemic and be meeting online in this fashion. But thank you. We're looking forward to this partnership and to discussing ways that we can reestablish our canopy tree and the areas impacted by the tornado. Just so everybody knows, in my committee, the Government Performance and Financial Management, next Tuesday, we're going to be briefing an ability to be able to tap into the reforestation fund at the city of Dallas during times of natural disasters, and to be able to help in this partnership. So please look forward to that, and any input. That'll be next Tuesday, and then that'll be coming to the full council afterwards. With that, I think I'll just turn it back over to you, but Councilmember Navarez, Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Magoo, and Councilmember Kleinman and I are thrilled that you're helping the city and our residents reestablish the needed tree canopy in the areas that were hit by the tornado. So thank you. And I'm going to mute so we can all hear you.
Great, and thank you again, because this couldn't have happened without all of your help, and you guys have such a great connection within your districts, and we want to make sure that we get this word out and get anybody that has questions about how do we deal with trees after a storm like this. How do I move forward? We want to make sure that we can answer everybody's questions, and the timing on this is perfect because we've worked in a lot of communities after tornadoes, and trees are usually the last things people think about, but once they've been able to recover their personal belongings and they've been able to rebuild their homes, the one thing that they realize is that, I can't get that large shade tree that was back in front of my house. And so sometimes this is the last part of that. And so we want to make sure that we can help everybody that needs it as we move forward. So speaking to you today, you're going to have a couple of different speakers. My name again is Matt. I'm the Director of Operations in Urban Forestry for the Texas Trees Foundation. You're also going to hear from Zach Wertz, who's our Urban Forestry Manager. You're going to hear from Micah Pace, who's the Director of Consulting with Preservation Trees Incorporated. And you're also going to hear from Sophia Johnson, who is going to speak to you a little bit about the census, because it is a census year. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to cover a quick synopsis on the 2020 census, and then we're going to talk about, what damage did it do, did the tornado do to the tree canopy cover in North Texas. We're going to talk about how do you deal with assessing your trees after the storm? How do you determine what the value of your tree is? Can you use that in insurance reporting? Really good information on how you hire a certified arborist, and we cannot stress this enough because not all arborists are treated equally. And then, if you're looking at planting a new tree, what are some best practices? And then finally, some information on how you can register to get more information when we lead up to a large tree planting initiative in the fall as we near the anniversary of the storm. So we're going to kick off with Sophia Johnson, and she's going to talk to you all a little bit about this year's census. So Sophia, I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for having Dallas Census as a part of this virtual town hall. Really excited to be with districts 6, 10, 11, and 13. I wanted to give you an idea of where we stand on the census. We're about 2 months in, and these are the rates for people who are self-reporting. So these are not the federal government knocking on your door, but these are the rates for people that have actually gone online or answered in the mail or called. And Matt, you can go ahead and click through that, because the city council has a bit of a competition going on that I know that Councilman Casey Thomas has been pushing. So you'll see your district's numbers coming up, and these numbers change every week. So in regard to that competition, I hope that you will see your district and really rally the people that are around you. You probably are people that have already filled out the census, but there are still a lot of people in your district that haven't filled it out. These are the response rates as of yesterday, and we're ranging from 45% of our community responding all the way up to 64%, but we still have a ways to go. Next slide, Matt, please. So I really want to stress, why do we fill out the census? The census is a survey that gives us a count of all of the people in our area. And when you talk about what's happened with our trees, and you think about disaster, or you think about the pandemic, the money that Dallas County is given, and the city of Dallas is given, and the state of Texas is given, is based on census numbers when you're talking about federal government funding. So the pandemic is an excellent example of why we need everyone counted, because census results mean more money and more power. And I really want everybody not to forget that. Census results mean more money and more power. So the more people counted, the more we will get in federal funding, and that affects things like Pell Grants, highways, pandemics, disasters, school construction, the Children's Health Insurance Program, community block grants. So many of our community and social services that we have are affected by how many people are in our community. Another important thing, when I say census counts affect power, the amount of members that we have in Congress is determined by how many people are in each state. The more people in a state, the more congressional representatives they get. So there is an opportunity, because Texas has had such phenomenal growth, for us to pick up 2 or 3 additional congressional representatives, while states like Mississippi that may be going down in their population might be losing a representative. But those representatives in Congress only go up, and we only have a louder voice in Texas if we're actually counted. That's why it's so important. We also have redistricting coming up, which will tell the Texas legislature how to draw the lines. And those lines are drawn based on alike numbers of population. So when everybody's counted, you can see how many people are in an area, and the lines can be drawn in a way where people that are more alike will get a representative. So it's really, really important that people are counted, not only so that we have access to the federal funding, not only for congressional representation, but also to make sure that when the lines of redistricting are drawn, that those communities that have mass have a representative that represents them. And then finally, next slide, Matt, if anybody's wondering, how do I fill out the census? Next slide, Matt. If anybody's wondering,
Yep.
how do I respond to this? You should have received an invitation in the mail in the middle of March. You should have received a couple of reminders throughout and all the way until the middle of April. And then in April, if you still had not responded, you got an actual paper survey. So what's happened in the past is you got the paper survey in the beginning. 10 years ago and 10 years before that, you got the paper survey right away. This time, the federal government decided to try it online first. So we had that 1 month of online where you could fill it out, and then you got it by mail, and you can also call. If you go online, the address is 2020census.gov. All you need to know is your address. So there were some people saying, oh, do I need to know my special ID? All you need to know is your address. Go to 2020census.gov, or you can call and you can answer the questions over the phone, or you can fill it out with this census survey that came in the mail. It's 10 questions. It takes less than 10 minutes. It took my husband and I probably about 6 minutes, but I would encourage you, please fill out your census. And like I said, probably everyone that's tuned in right now has already done it, but please tell your neighbors, fill out the census, because the census results will affect how much money and how much power we have in North Texas. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Sophia. That was really great information. You know, I serve in some public ways in another city in the DFW area, and it's so important that we get an accurate count of the number of people that live in our area. So thank you for that information. If you have questions throughout this webinar, there's in the chat box, you can ask a question, and we will make sure that we get all of those answered at the end of the webinar. So now we're going to kick into talking about trees. Some of you may not know or have heard of the Texas Trees Foundation before. The Texas Trees Foundation is a private nonprofit here in the Dallas area. We were founded in 1982 by Trammell Crow and Robert Deckard, and we were actually the original Dallas Parks Foundation. And we were the Parks Foundation for a while, and actually built Pioneer Plaza, which is we was a public-private partnership with the city of Dallas, and is a great second most visited site in Dallas behind Dealey Plaza. But Trammell really liked to plant trees, and so we then became the Dallas Trees and Parks Foundation, and then in the early 2000s, we went to the Texas Trees Foundation because we do projects all across the state of Texas. The majority of our work that we do is right here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but we do work across the state. And we've been working very, very closely with the city of Dallas for a really, really long time. And the reason that we're able to provide a lot of the information that we have here today is a lot of the research that we have done in conjunction with the city of Dallas. Starting back in 2009, when we did the very first urban tree canopy cover for the city, leading up to our State of the Dallas Urban Forest Report, to our urban heat island study that we did in 2017 with Georgia Tech. We redid the urban tree canopy cover study in 2019, and right now we're in the process of working very, very closely with the city of Dallas, not only on their CCAP plan, which is a fantastic document that the city is getting ready to adopt, but part of that is also going to be the urban forestry master plan, which will feed directly into that plan that will help give direction to the city in terms of how we deal with our urban forest moving forward. And why is all that so important? Well, you know, those that are on this call realize the importance of trees, because you were devastated by a tornado that ripped through essentially a 15-mile stretch through Dallas into Richardson, actually into Garland and into Rowlett, spawning several different tornadoes with winds that reached 140 miles an hour. And I'm sure you all remember exactly where you were and what that experience was like. And what did that do to the tree canopy cover? you know, that left a lasting scar that you can see here in this picture. This was an area of town that has lots of large, mature, very high quality species, a lot of oaks and pecans and really great quality trees. And it really did. It totally devastated trees on individual streets and in blocks, and why a lot of you are here today. It changes the look and a feel of a location when you lose tree canopy cover like that. Not only can you see a visible scar from an aerial, but you can really notice it when you're on the ground. How many trees did we lose? We were fortunate enough, because we had done a tree canopy cover analysis, just had completed a tree canopy cover analysis in the first part of 2019. We had really good up-to-date data. And then the city flew the area directly after the storm, which is pretty representative, because they want to be able to use it for FEMA reporting and things like that. And we were able to get on the ground pretty quickly and do a pretty good estimate of the number of trees that were lost. And what we were able to identify was that there was close to 3,500 trees that were completely destroyed as part of that tornado just in Dallas alone. That accounts to close to 201 acres of tree canopy cover. So that was a lot of trees. In addition to the number of trees that were lost, there's additional 2,000 plus trees that are going to need major restorative pruning. It means they're not so damaged that they need to be removed, but there's probably other structural damage that happened to those trees due to the high winds that need to be have corrective pruning to get those trees back to a good shape, and not so that they will not cause problems later on. This was very, very devastating to the tree population in this area. Certain districts lost 2% of their tree canopy cover. So that's a huge percentage of that. Get to the next slide. So now what I'm going to do is turn that over to Micah Pace with Preservation Tree, and he's going to start talking to you about how do you assess your trees. If you still have a tree that is standing in your yard, how do you assess that tree, or what's some good information that you need to be able to have moving forward. So Micah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks Matt, and good evening everybody. Just a quick shout out to Matt and the Texas Trees Foundation team. I'd really like to stress to the council members that are on today what a magnificent partner you have in them, and I would just encourage you to maximize that relationship. You're not going to find a better team probably anywhere. So good job on putting this together, and all the reporting and studies that you do to help us improve our canopy map. Thanks for inviting me. And again, my name's Micah. I'm a consulting arborist with Preservation Tree. You can go to the next slide if you want.
There's a little bit of a delay.
Okay, no problem. So, you know, it goes without saying that storms are inevitable. We're going to have plenty of damage, you know, yearly for various reasons. Thankfully, not as large as, you know, the damage that we saw last year with the tornado, but certainly we live in a high risk area for storms, usually in the spring and in the fall, when those warm Gulf currents collide with the cold fronts coming down across the plains. So we should be prepared to understand our trees, to understand risk assessment, how to have you know, good relationships with professional arborists in your area so that you can get the proper advice. You know, the two main questions that you'll find is, you know, is my tree going to survive? And then, is it safe? So those are two very separate, different questions. The tree could survive for many years, all beat up and broken, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's safe to leave it. So, you know, we really want to be looking at safety first, of course, and usually when a large emergency like this occurs, arborists, you know, aren't going to come onto the scene until after the emergency, you know, response is done. Unfortunately, a lot of times trees are removed too soon before arborists, professional arborists that have the qualification for risk assessment can get in there and take a look. It's not uncommon for trees that get defoliated from a storm to be able to resprout. It's a little bit dependent on the pre-damage condition of the tree, how healthy it was, species tolerance to damage, and the ability for sprouting. Some trees sprout more prolifically than others. But obviously, in a large scale storm as we experienced, it's all hands on deck, and everyone tries to do the best we can. But the two questions, is the tree going to survive versus is it safe? And you definitely need a consulting arborist or someone with a higher level of experience and qualification to be able to discern the difference between a tree that just got defoliated that can resprout or refoliate the following year versus trees that are a lost cause. And quite honestly, the trees that are broken in half, it's very obvious that those are a loss. Trees that might have a few broken limbs, those are going to be fine. It's the ones in the middle where you're uncertain what to do, that you really need the assistance. And again, I encourage you to call a professional, because the value in the trees that we have can't be replaced immediately or within a short order. So it's best to get a professional's advice before removing the tree if you're unsure. Next slide, please. So trees that can be saved, do require expert care. Matt used the term, restoration pruning, and that's partly what this slide is going to be looking at. But obviously, the first step is to have an arborist come out, someone who's qualified to assess the tree and look at it in terms of its candidacy for preservation and the associated risk rating. If the tree is low risk or medium risk, and it's possible to save it, then obviously we would encourage you to do that. If it has a high risk rating, it might need to be removed, but just because it has a high risk rating doesn't mean it has to be removed. Through restoration pruning, strategic weight reduction and reshaping of the canopy, supplemental cabling systems, those types of things could, if it was possible to make an investment in the tree, could prolong the life of the tree and help to restore it to some functionality on your property. Trees that are salvageable, generally need to be looked at in terms of the risk first, then looked at in terms of what management strategy should be used in helping it recover. And this is usually a multi-year process. It's not typically a one-time visit. Generally speaking, trees that receive that type of damage need to be revisited every few years to assess the recovery of the tree and additional maintenance that might be needed in the canopy. A few different services at the bottom I listed there. Root stimulation programs can be effective in advancing root growth and function and the overall recovery effort. Healthy roots, healthy plant. So if the ability to make the investment in root stimulation services are there, then I would recommend that as well. Next slide, please. So we get a lot of calls about tree appraisal every year, certainly after storms. And what's my tree worth is the question. Trees that are completely destroyed, the insurance would typically consider them, quote unquote, a total loss. So typically insurance needs to be, your respective insurance agency has to be contacted to determine what your policy dictates. I've had some companies that are very pro tree and easy to work with, others that did not want to give any money for the tree. That's going to vary based on your policy, but I would encourage you to contact your insurance agency first. If the tree needs to be appraised, you can look at various different cost estimates. A replacement cost looks at replacing the tree in terms of its species, its size, its pre-damage condition. Of course, you're not going to replace a 30-inch diameter oak, but you're going to evaluate the tree as that size and then use a smaller tree to represent the replacement of that tree. The cost of cure deals with trees that need pruning and other services to help it recover. So that can be used as a way of assessing or appraising the damage of the tree. And the reproduction cost there deals with how do we reproduce the services that the trees are providing. So for example, if you had a row of trees that were providing privacy, through dense foliage, do you need to replace the exact same species, the exact same size, or will other species and sizes supplement that? So replacement costs, cost of cure, and reproduction costs are all separate estimates of value that can be done on trees, and the scenario is going to determine which methodology is used. Very important is that the pre-damage images of the tree are a huge advantage. Most people don't necessarily go around taking pictures of their trees unless you're a tree nut, but if you happen to have pre-damage images of those trees, they'll be way more valuable in the appraisal process. Thankfully, if it's a front yard tree, thankfully Google has done a lot of historical images on various streets, not all streets of course. So sometimes you can get lucky and you can go back in time using Google and see images of your tree, and those can suffice. If you are expecting to ask for an appraisal, have appraisal done in your tree, see if you can find some images. If the tree's still there, get out and take some pictures. Some important other data points is the species type, trunk diameter, size, the functional characteristics of the tree on the property. Like I said, is it a pivotal tree on your property or was it a fence line tree? All of that goes into determining the overall appraised value of the tree. One thing that came up last year following the storm and early this year so far is I've had residents contact me discussing reappraised values for their property that the Dallas County Property Appraisal District has issued to them, and they were in conflict with the appraised value. If this is something that your constituents or residents are going through, just encourage them to contact a consulting arborist to walk through the process of appraising trees to see how they can add value to that process. But I am aware that the Dallas County Property Appraisal District was considering the loss of trees and reassessing property values throughout the affected area. Next slide, please. I think that was the last one. So that's all I have right now. I'm happy to answer questions. If you want to type them in or send them to me, there's my contact information. Preservation Tree can pretty much help with anything tree related, so give us a call if you need anything, and I'm happy to answer any questions online or off. Appreciate the opportunity to share with you today.
Thank you, Micah. And that's great information. And I think what the point is trees have value, as I'm sure most of you on this panel realize. You know that they have a value to you, and there is a way of calculating that value. And to get the most precise value, it's a pretty detailed process that you go through. It uses a peer-reviewed, tested method that's put together through the Landscape Guide for Plant Appraisal, and you can get a really close value for what your tree is. But if you're looking for something kind of quick and dirty, what we've done here at the Texas Trees Foundation is set up a way for you to be able to go in and put your tree into our tree tracker and get kind of a ballpark range of what the value of your tree was. And to talk about that, I'm going to turn that over to Zach.
Great, thanks, Matt, and thank you, Micah. So as you just heard from Matt, there are some ways to find some estimates for tree values. As Micah pointed out, it's a complicated system to do it professionally, and that is always going to be the best way to do it. But as Matt said, if you're interested in getting kind of a baseline idea of some values from your trees, we can help with that. So we're implementing what we're calling a citizen science program, where homeowners across the DFW can help us and help themselves understand the values of the trees that were lost or damaged. So basically having, over 3,000 trees damaged or lost in the storm, it's really difficult for us to log and track the extent of specifically what that damage on each property was. And this is where our online tree map can help us. So individuals are able to add their trees, alive or dead, to our maps, and you can see some estimated values for those trees based on things like size and species. You're also able to take a look at all of the other trees that folks have added in your area. So the first step of this process is to visit our storm response webpage, which is this link down at the bottom of this slide. So it's bit.ly/TTF storm response. And it's got a lot of great information on some frequently asked questions, some of which we'll answer here today, but some of which you can read into further. So when you get to this site, this is one of the things you're going to see. The text on my slides is pretty small, so you'll have to actually visit and read for yourself to see all that great information. But the key here is that blue box, and that link will take you directly to our storm project. And also on this page, there's a step-by-step guide for how you can add your trees, and that's got infographics and text to help you go through the entire process. So this will be your #1 resource if you're interested in letting us know what happened on your property and the status of your trees. So I'm going to briefly go through that process with you now, but you can always refer to our webpage for specific directions. All right, so when you click on that blue box, this is going to be the page that you'll see. This is our tree plotter inventory system. And we use this system to track all of the trees that TTF plants, works with, and gives away over the years. So by using the link on the webpage, you'll automatically be taken to that storm response project. And so initially you'll see just trees that were added by folks just like you across DFW to demonstrate their storm damaged trees. When you're using our system, we really highly recommend that you create a login and use it anytime you're using the map. You are able to add data without creating a login, but all it takes is an email and a password. And what it allows you to do is add a little bit more information about your tree. And then if you make any mistakes, you can actually edit the data. If you're not logged in, once you hit that submit button, you won't be able to change anything. So we really, really highly recommend that you log in so that in the future, if anything changes with your tree status, you can update it. So there's a couple of different ways to find yourself on our map. If you're familiar with systems like Google Maps, this is pretty much the same thing. You can hover over your neighborhood and zoom in to find your house. Or you can use the small toolbar to either put in your address or allow our map system to access your computer's location. So it can take you directly to where you're at. So once you're either logged in or have found your address, you can click the Add a Tree button on our Home tab to begin the process of adding your trees in. Next slide, please, Matt. Matt, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so when you click that Add a Tree button, the system's set up really nicely. So a white crosshair is going to appear on your screen. And you can just center that over the tree that you're looking to upload some data about. You can fill out the information on that box on the left-hand side. So you need a little bit of information. Again, this isn't quite as in-depth as what Micah was talking about. So we ask for the common name of your tree. So for example, Texas red oak, live oak, pine, whatever it may be. And if you need help figuring out what your tree is, we have some resources on our website that you can visit. And then you also need DBH, which is the diameter of your tree at 4.5 feet above the ground. So like I said, there's those step-by-step instructions. If you need any information on how to take measurements or how to use the system, you can refer back to those or contact us for help. And then some other information like land use. For most folks, it'll be residential in this case. And then tree type, which will be inventory. So like I said, we use the system for a lot of different functions within our organization. So the citizen science inventory needs to be marked as inventory trees so we can keep track of that. And then the last thing you need is to make sure that the project is set to that tornado storm damage so that your tree is put into the right project and doesn't get lost anywhere. So once you've added your tree, you can click the Explore Map option to see other trees around you. And you can also click on your own tree to learn a little bit more about it. So our mapping system is hooked up with a system called iTree, which is how professionals in our field value trees for the ecosystem benefits that they provide. So when you click on your tree, you'll be able to see some estimates for structural value, like Michael was talking about. How much would it cost to replace that tree that you had lost. But you'll also be able to see some things like, what does your tree contribute in stormwater management or property value, energy conservation, or carbon sequestration. So this is a really great tool to get some estimates on, what that tree added to your property and to your neighbors as well. So that is the quick basic process of adding trees. And then, like I said, there's a lot to explore on that site. You can also see some of our other projects that we're working on in the area. If you have any questions, please remember that website, bit.ly/TTF storm response. And this information will also be available on our website. So you could take a look at it there. All right, so with that valuation information, I want to just jump back quickly to what Micah was talking about before with some of those common storm damage issues and discuss some of that with you as well. And Matt, it looks like I only have a poll on my screen. So we do have this poll running in the background of this project. So if you're interested in a free tree, please take the poll, and we'll also have some more information at the end that you can sign up for to hear from us later once we're ready to move forward with tree giveaways. So as Micah was saying, there's really varying degrees of damage that trees can go through. And so I just wanted to really briefly illustrate some of this since Micah had already talked about it. Micah, if you want to jump point, please feel free. So as you heard, there's this gradient from kind of minor to major damage, from a few broken branches to more broken limbs, and then ultimately to broken trunks or trees that have failed. So if your tree, as Micah said, doesn't present an immediate hazard, it may survive some even severe storm damage. And trees can lose about 1/3 of their canopy before they start experiencing really noticeable stress. And trees that lose more than half their canopy are starting to be on that edge of less likely to survive, depending on what species they are. So these images represent total failures. So this is the most major end of that spectrum. So if your tree ended up with the green side down after the tornado, it's likely you've already had it removed. Unfortunately, a lot of this damage just isn't repairable at all, but these provide great opportunities to replant in the future. Across most urban areas, when we have trees, we tend to see what we call codominant leaders or codominant stems. And that's used to describe a tree that has 2 or more main stems that are about the same diameter that emerge from the same place on the trunk. So like I said, these are really common in urban areas, and they can actually lead to some structural issues with trees. So this is that middle ground that Micah mentioned, where it becomes really difficult to say for an untrained individual, that tree's fine or it needs some help. So this is where we really encourage you to get a professional opinion. So this is something where codominant leaders have failed, something that we saw quite a lot in our drives around the neighborhoods after the tornado. And so even if there's minor damage on your tree because of something like this, into the future, some issues with wood decay and rot can be a concern. So again, it's always best, if you're not sure, to have someone who's a professional, who is certified to come out and take a look. So leaning trees can also sometimes be tough to detect. So a lot of trees will naturally grow with a lean. Maybe it's to reach for sunlight, or it had an injury when it was young that caused a crook. But if your tree has a new lean since the storm, that could be a sign of major root damage. So if you're seeing the soil bulge up around your tree, or if you knew it wasn't leaning before and it is now, this is something that you really should have checked out. Because it can be a sign of that root damage that can really affect the structure and the structural stability of your tree. Okay, Matt. And so one of the other really common things that we saw, as Micah had mentioned, are these standing trees that lost all their fine branches. So these trees are probably not dead as long as they weren't removed. But they're going to have a tough time because they've lost basically all of their ability to produce food. So at this point in the year, these trees are probably starting or have started to resprout already and have some leaves and foliage, but it's likely that they may not be able to support the amount of growth that they used to. So this is something that you can work with a professional to kind of figure out, you know, is this tree viable to save into the future, or should I think about replanting? And again, those trees that lost more than about half of their smaller branches, that's when we start being worried about their survival. So one really important note that I'd like to make on all of this kind of damage assessment is we are giving examples for things that you can look for, but not all damage is apparent to the untrained eye. So tree health can be assessed with the help of an expert throughout the process. And it's a really great idea if you're unsure about anything to just go ahead and seek out professional help. And so Matt is going to explain a little bit about where you can find those professionals and how you can select one that you know you can trust and work with.
Thank you, Zach. That was great information from both you and Micah. And I think the thing that keyed home was that, you know, trees are a living, breathing, biotic organism. And so you need to have a professional look at them if you have any questions. It's really easy when the guy pulls up in his, you know, his sedan and he's got a pole saw sticking out of the back and he's giving you a really good deal to prune your trees. You know, it can be kind of enticing to jump on that. But trees are an investment, as you've seen and as you know, and as trees get bigger and if they're taken care of, they actually add value not only to your property but to the community as a whole. And they need to be taken care of, just like you would need to call somebody that is certified to work on your HVAC, or you would want to call somebody that would be certified to work on your pool or whatever. You need to have somebody that's trained, that knows what to look at, because all species are different. Every situation and yard is different. How those trees have been treated throughout the life of that tree is different, and it really takes somebody with a trained eye to be able to give you a professional opinion on what the state of that tree is. I've seen more trees get cut down that didn't need to be cut down because they got bad advice. And worse off, I've seen trees that should have been cut down that somebody that wasn't trained said, no, that tree is okay. And then that tree drops a limb and it falls on your car, it falls on your house, or it does something untoward. And that's what we really want to avoid. And that's why it's so important, especially when you're talking about big trees, and especially when you're talking about big trees after a storm where there might be damage that you can't see. And one thing that a good certified arborist will do, especially if it's a big tree and it's after a storm, is they'll actually throw a rope up in that tree and they'll climb up into it and they'll start to examine those different branch structures and those different branch unions, and to see if there's breaks that you can't see from the ground. And that's very, very important, because you don't want to be backing out of your driveway one day and have that limb fail and fall on your car. So how do you get started with that? You know, the best way to start is to look for a certified arborist, and arborists are certified through the International Society of Arboriculture. And you can go to their page and you can actually search in certified arborists in your area. To be a certified arborist, you have to have had so many CEU credits. You've gone through an intensive testing process. You have to be insured and bonded. There's other qualifications that you can have once you become a certified arborist. You can be a board certified master arborist. You can get your tree risk assessment qualification, which is an additional training that you have to go through to be able to assess trees, especially after storms, to be able to determine if they're safe. And then you can also look to see if they're part of the American Society of Consulting Arborists. And if they've taken the time to go through all of these steps, that means that they've invested personally, and their company's invested personally, quite a bit of money and time in training and resources and affiliations to make sure that they're giving you the best information that you possibly can. But with that said, not all arborists are treated equally. You know, just because somebody's a certified arborist doesn't mean that that's the first person you want to go with. So some great questions that you can ask is make sure that they can give you a free assessment. You know, they shouldn't be charging you to come out and to give you a proposal. You'd want to see a proposal in writing. Anybody that advertises topping trees, which is just not doing proper pruning practices, where they just top trees off at the major branches. Lowest price does not always equal quality, especially when it comes to trees. Pruning trees correctly, using climbing gear and somebody that's trained, they've invested in those climbers. They've invested in those people that work for them, and there's a cost there. But the value of your tree is such that you really should be paying what it takes to have a good quality arborist look at your tree. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go get bids. I always recommend calling, 2 or 3 different qualified companies and getting bids and asking them questions, and then taking the one that you feel best about. What you have to really be careful of is, when you get what I call a chuck in a truck, that show up after a storm like this, the same way all the roofers show up, is you want to make sure that they're licensed, they're bonded, and they're insured. I've been on properties where they've taken half the tree down and then the guy never comes back, or the homeowner leaves, they cut off a limb, the limb falls on the house or the car, and they take off because they don't have insurance. So it's really, really important that you make sure that they are insured and bonded, and that they're using the right equipment. And you want to ask them questions like, do you top trees? What is your recommendation here? It's okay to say, one arborist said this, what's your recommendation on that? The more questions that you ask, realizing that trees are an investment and they add a lot of value to your property. So making sure that you take that time to ask those right questions and get the arborist that works best for you is really, really important. I can't stress that enough. That's one thing that I see a lot in trees across DFW, is you think that the person that you have mowing your lawn can give you advice on your trees. And that's not the case. They're not trained. They don't have the same training as a certified arborist or as an urban forester. And so making sure that you get the right person to look at your tree is going to save you a lot of headaches down the road. And actually, it'll save you money over time. Because trees that are improperly pruned will throw suckers and will sprout uncontrollably, which then causes you to have to prune those trees year after year after year, where a good arborist will come in and prune your tree the right way, and then you may only need to prune that tree every 3, 4, or 5 years, depending on the size of the tree. So it can really save you money over time. So now I want to just kind of quickly go over, let's say that you are getting ready to replace a tree that you might have lost. So what are some kind of key things, some best practices to think of when you're going out to plant your new tree? First, you need to realize where you are and what trees do well here. Making sure that it's a tree, we do recommend native, or what I call well-adapted trees. Our species palette is smaller here than a lot of other places in the United States. And so we have to rely on trees that are adapted to here as well. One of my favorite trees that I like to plant right now is a Monterey oak. And Monterey oaks are a very great, hardy, healthy tree that does really, really well in our Dallas climates, but it's not technically native to here. So you gotta be careful that you're not just planting and limiting yourself to just native trees. What you want to make sure you're doing is you're not planting something that's going to be invasive, and really staying away from those types of trees that could cause problems down the line. You want to look at what your site conditions are. How much room do you have for a tree? What's the function that you're looking for? Do you want to grow that tree for shade? Do you want to grow that tree for aesthetic purposes? This is an accent tree. So realizing that, or trying to get the tree that is going to meet the function for what you want it to do is really, really important. Understand what the maintenance are for trees. Some trees, are messy trees. They drop acorns, they drop leaves. There's no tree that's completely maintenance free, but there's trees that have less maintenance, so to speak. One of my favorite trees is a bur oak, but they produce golf ball size acorns. If you don't like big acorns, then you probably don't want to plant a bur oak. Some trees will hold on to their leaves most of the year. Some of them will drop them every fall. So really understanding what that maintenance is and what you're comfortable with is really, really important, because you don't want it to become a nuisance that you didn't anticipate later on. Understand how big that tree is going to get. Understand the area that's around there. There's a lot of bad press, and a lot of times it's rightly so when Encore comes through and has to clear their right of way around their power lines. But I'm here to tell you 90% of the trees that they have to come in and prune out, the power lines were there first, and somebody planted that tree incorrectly in the wrong spot, and it grew up into those power lines, and then they have to come in and prune them out. And that's not always the case, but in most of the cases, that is the case. And so really paying attention that you're not going to buy a tree and then plant a tree that's going to grow 40 or 50 feet tall and then look up and know that there's a power line behind it, because you're just asking for problems down the road. So making sure that you understand how big that tree is going to get, how wide the canopy is going to get, so that you can deal with those moving on. And then just, what you like, make sure you have a tree that you want to enjoy and get out and sit under and go out and maybe hook a hammock up to as it gets bigger. Planning accordingly, making sure that you allow proper spacing. A lot of times I see this where trees get planted way too close to homes because they think it's going to provide shade. I attribute this to the biggest time that pounds get dogs returned is in March, because everybody thinks it's cute to get a puppy for Christmas, and then that puppy gets big and they all get returned. Well, that happens with trees too. They get this tree and they go home and they plant it 5 feet from their home, and 20 years later that tree is uprooting their foundation and is growing into the house, and all of a sudden it's the tree's fault. No, with a little bit of care and understanding of how that tree was going to grow and planted correctly within your landscape, you want to make sure that you're planning for success in the future by making sure that you answer all of those questions up front before you ever put a shovel in the ground. And again, if you are getting ready to plant a tree, we want to make sure that you're doing it the right way. Just some key things to remember: if you are going to be digging in your property, always call 811. You don't know what's underground. It's very, very important that you call 811 so they can come out and mark your utilities. That's also important because you don't want to have to plant a tree over a gas line or over your water line or something like that then could cause problems later on. And then when you go to the nursery, you want to make sure you select a quality tree. You want to make sure that just because there's a big sale or a run on trees doesn't mean that it's the best tree that you want to get. Kind of like hiring an arborist, paying a little bit more for a good tree is going to help you down the line. The most important part of that tree's life is the day that you put it in the ground. And if you plant it correctly and you plant it in the right location and you plant it the right way, you're setting yourself up for success in the future. We have lots of information on our website, which I've included the link here, including videos on how to properly plant a tree, videos on how to properly water a tree, how much water should you give a tree, what's the proper place that you should put it in your landscaping. I will say a really quick word on water. We have a tendency, believe it or not, to overwater trees, and we actually kill more trees in our area from overwatering than we do from underwatering. So understanding how to properly water trees, especially in our climate, is extremely, extremely important. So I encourage you that if you're looking to buy a tree and get one installed, to visit our website, go check out some of those resources. Feel free to email myself or any one of our foresters. We would be happy to point you in the right direction and give you some good feedback and answer your questions if you're thinking about going that direction. So let's say you aren't going to go out and plant your own tree and you want to work with us on a program that we're working on with some local partners. And this is something that we're really, really excited about. The purpose of this webinar was really to get information out there to help people understand how to deal with their trees. But what we also are doing is we're working very closely with the City of Dallas, and Councilwoman Gates mentioned this at the beginning, that they're looking to get a special resolution to amend the tree ordinance so that we can use some funds out of that tree mitigation funds to be able to provide trees to homeowners that lost trees because of this natural disaster. This is not normal tree loss. This is a large loss of a tree canopy cover because of a natural disaster. And we've got some really great partners that we're working with on this, besides the City of Dallas, including a local organization called RETREET. which plants trees after natural disasters all across the country, and their executive director, Grady McGann. And also a group that sprouted up called Kids Love Trees, and Brian Smith and his two kids who live in a neighborhood that was heavily impacted by this tornado, and their kids were really taken back by the loss of trees that were in their neighborhood, and decided to do something about it. And so these kids have started to raise funds to replace trees. And so they're also going to help with volunteers when we get into the planting process. So we've got some really great partners that we're going to try to make sure that everybody that would like a free tree would like to work with us to help plant trees into neighborhoods, so that we can replace as many of these 3,500 trees as possible. Because the quicker we get these trees in the ground, the quicker we'll be able to regrow that canopy. And we couldn't do it without partners like the City of Dallas and RETREET and Kids Love Trees. And we also have several sponsors that we'll be announcing and talking about in the coming weeks. And what we're going to be doing over the summer is continuing to broadcast this message. So if you have residents or friends that live in your neighborhood that you think need to hear this message, again, this will be a taped video webinar that you can share with them. We're open to go and speak to any HOA more about what this program is. And what we're going to be doing over the summer is gathering information on who is interested in getting a free tree and who is interested in possibly volunteering. And so there's two links that you see there at the bottom. And I would encourage you that if you're interested in either one, to please go in and sign up. And what we will then do is respond to you fairly quickly with what next steps are. In turn, we will be able to let you know a group of species that you'll be able to select from. We'll be able to communicate with you on what a planting day is going to look like. With these unsure times we are in right now, our normal mode of how we do tree plantings in neighborhoods may not be what we end up doing, and it might be a hybrid of something. So we're still going to be working on those details throughout the summer and seeing what comes about and how we can get people together. But the goal is to help anybody that needs a tree that lost one from this tornado to be able to get one, get the right tree, get it in the right place, the right way, and be able to replace that canopy so that we can regrow the canopy of North Dallas that was affected by this tornado. So I really appreciate everybody's time that came out. Eric, I'll ask you, were there any questions that came in through the chat box that we can answer?
Yes, there were a few questions. The first one is from Gerald Mann. I spoke with DCAD around January, and they said they were not considering down trees and property value. How do we know when or if that will change?
Micah, you've worked with the most homeowners directly with that. Would you like to answer that?
I'm not sure I completely understood the question. I think the individual was stating that they were provided information that trees were not considered in the appraisal process of the property. I would just highly recommend that they contact the appraisal district for follow up on that, because as far as I know, that has been a consideration in several different cases that I've been involved with.
All right. We have a question from Leticia Little. Has anyone had any success getting insurance to pay to replace trees?
I guess I'll take that as well. I've worked with multiple clients over the years, not solely related to the 2019 tornado, but in other damage claims. And again, it's policy specific. So you'll have to, I know it's not exciting, but you're gonna have to get on the phone to call the insurance company and double check what your policy specifically dictates regarding trees.
All right,
and I'll agree. I'll reiterate what Mike has said, because I have talked to a couple of homeowners and a couple of insurance agents as well. And I learned this after a tornado that hit in Rowlett, in the city that I've learned, and it really comes down to what your policy is and what your policy. And there is you can include landscaping and trees within your policy. Obviously, that usually comes with a higher premium. But you have I've seen that they've had a really hard time of getting those covered if they weren't covered in that policy.
Yeah, and then just one more small detail on that. It's the policies will have very specific language that dictates what specific cost reimbursement is allowed, removal, for example, or stump grinding. If there's debris or pieces already on the ground, they typically won't cover the cost of that. They tend to just only look at the tree itself and whatever's still remaining.
Okay, we have a question
The
from.
more information that you can have, the better. Go ahead, Eric.
We have a question from Catherine Gravel. How do we get assistance with trees? We lost over $300,000 worth of trees on Ursula. I added the inventory of tree loss to your site several months ago. How do we participate?
Great question. We would love to get you to sign up at one of the links below. And I would also encourage you to, I'm gonna pull up my contact information here. Please visit our website and email me, and we will get you plugged in. We really need the help immediately in spreading the word throughout these neighborhoods. And so, we would love to work with you to do, we can do another webinar with just the people on your street or within your HOA to answer specific questions on how they can get involved. So we're looking for those champions with each individual neighborhood. Again, this was over, 15 miles. This wasn't just one neighborhood that was affected. It affected many, many, many neighborhoods and 4 different council districts. So we're looking for those leaders in each one of those neighborhoods that we can connect with, that we can start to really spread the word. And that's really going to be our focus over the next couple months, so that we can get the word out and get as many people registered as possible, so we can put together a plan of how we can help them.
Great. We have a question from Julie Inslee. What is the mortality rate of planting more mature trees versus younger trees?
Ask that question again, please.
What is the mortality rate of planting more mature trees versus younger trees?
Higher.
I'll answer this one. Yeah, so the larger the tree that you plant, your percentage of survival rate goes down. If you start planting trees that are 6, 7, 8, 10 inches in caliper, those are very, very, very large trees. And they have to be cared for a really long time. And most of those trees are dug out of the ground. They're balled and burlap, or they're transplanted trees. And the rule of thumb is it takes a year per caliper inch to replace the roots that were lost. So if you plant a 10-inch tree, you have to treat that tree like a new tree for 10 years until it's replaced all of its root system. So even though you might not get the biggest bang for your buck at immediate planting in terms of the visual piece of it, the sweet spot is really kind of that 30-gallon range, a tree that's 1.5 to 2.5 inches in caliper, that's grown in a container, where you get 100% of that root system. And believe it or not, you plant a 30-gallon tree next to a large 6, 8-inch tree, in 10 years, they're the same size, because that's how long it takes that tree to get acclimated to the site. Plus, they're really, really, really expensive. So what I usually recommend is start smaller, as small as you can go, and they will catch up very, very quickly. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right, question from Christy Singania. Any advice for homes that have been deemed a total loss in the construction process? We have had 2 different opinions on the stress the tree is already under. Any ways to prevent further damage or stress?
Yeah, I would recommend that is one of, it sounds like you have a tree that's in one of those middle ground scenarios where it's not already on the ground. And would recommend that you contact an arborist to come out and take a look at it so that you can get the best advice possible.
Any advice for trees that are viable but will need to have a new home built around them?
Yeah, I think they're asking
Micah,
about I think they're asking about tree preservation strategies. I mean, obviously the answer is consult with a professional. But the most basic thing you can do is provide as much protective space around the tree as possible where no excavation is going to occur, no soil compaction is going to occur, no storing of materials or piling of materials is going to occur. That's your best chance of saving a tree during construction. So if the tree is valuable to you, create a protective area that has a radius equivalent to the number equivalent feet in terms of the number of inches of trunk. So if it's a 10-inch diameter trunk, you're going to want a 10-foot radius around the trunk of the tree that becomes a no-fly zone. So protect the roots. It's all about protecting the roots from being excavated, cut, damaged, or compacted through heavy machinery driving over the roots of the tree. You do that and you're halfway there.
All right. Any advice if I wish to cut down my tree and save some money?
Micah?
Well, I mean, it's going to cost you money to cut the tree down unless you do it yourself. So I'm not sure how leaving the tree costs you money unless you're referring to maintenance. But yeah, that is a personal question. I mean, it's not every tree is worth saving, and even trees that can be preserved, that doesn't mean you have to have them. If a tree is problematic or you're just ready to re-landscape or move on or change your property, if the tree is large enough that it's going to require expertise of climbing and rigging with ropes, then you're definitely going to want to call a licensed insured company, Preservation Tree or others out there, to come and get you a quote. You're not going to want to be trying to do that by yourself when trees are that large.
Yeah, if you have a tree that has limbs that overhang your house or overhang infrastructure, you don't realize the amount of weight that is up there and the amount of material that is there, and you can get yourself into trouble really, really quickly. So unless it's a fairly small tree, highly, highly, highly recommend that you get a professional to come out and help you remove it.
And on that note, a question from Mary Smith. Are there any arborists you recommend?
Yeah, so obviously we have preservation on. I mean, we have a great partnership with preservation, but other good arborists in the area are Arbological Services, Davey Resource Group, Sam Hill Tree Care. Those are a few that are just really great ones that I would recommend. But again, there's other ones that are out there. Just ask those questions and follow some of those procedures that we talked about in this presentation.
And then our last question in the queue from Julie Inslee. Never mind, we got one more coming. Does synthetic turf affect health of trees even with large dirt ring around the trunk?
Yes, depending on the quality of the material you used. Ultimately, you just want to look at the very fine print of the specifications for the material to make sure that it's pervious material. But they do tend to increase the soil temperature. And when you increase the soil temperature, you increase the transpiration rate of the tree, evaporation loss through the soil. So the tree may require a little bit additional irrigation, supplemental irrigation. But the larger the tree ring that can be left, the better your tree will appreciate it.
And just to also add on to that, you've got to realize the majority of your tree roots are what's within called the drip line or underneath the crown of the tree. So if you can stay outside of that, you would have better success. And then it's really looking about if you're going to use synthetic turf, and some of the newer stuff has more permeability. Obviously, you have the heating up of the soil like Micah talked about, but it's making sure that you can have that exchange of gases in the soil, because that's where it gets the oxygen that it needs. And if you cut that off, then the roots are going to come to the surface, and then they're going to push through your turf. So making sure that you leave as much room as possible, but it can be done. It just needs to be done carefully.
All right, then our last question in the queue. We had to cut a tree from the storm down. The roots still want to live. Is the only way to plant over or near is to grind it down?
It's going to be the best way.
Yes,
Most effective.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that we'll be working with those homeowners that would like to get a new tree, is helping them to figure out what steps need to happen to get ready for that. And if you lost a large tree in your front yard, you're more than likely going to have to get the stump ground out to be able to make room for a new tree. And that's the most common way, or that's the easiest way to be able to completely get rid of it so that you can make room for a new one.
That's everything I've got for
Is
you.
that all our questions?
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining. Thank you very much to our council members that joined, and for all of your help and support as we move through this. And please reach out to us with any additional questions, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you'll share this presentation with us so we can share it back out for people that couldn't join us this evening. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks.
Great job, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Of course.
Take care.